Hey, this is AmKay at Purple Sky 11, and this is the rest of part 10 of my series where I'm digging into the Owen Hart investigation files. This video is beyond overdue, so I'm gonna spare you the intro, and we're gonna pick up right where part 10A ended, so let's get right to it. So picking up where we left off on the investigation timeline, we're now on July 8th, 1999. And this is the day following the in-person interview Detective Martin had with Tom DeWeer, a stunt expert with the International Stunt Association in Hollywood. And during that meeting, DeWeer was allowed to inspect the equipment that had been used for Owen Hart's stunt, and he gave his opinion about what likely went wrong and what could have been done differently as far as the setup and the rigging used. And now on this day, July 8th, Detective Martin will be meeting with Tom DeWeer again, this time to do some hands-on testing of the equipment. So let's take a look at this report, which, like most of the other reports in this series, is by Detective William Martin with the Homicide Unit of the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And this one is a 2-page report. And on this day, in Valencia, California, Detective Martin met with Tom DeWeer and his associate, Perry Barnt, who is also a stuntman and special effects person. And it says the reason for this meeting was to perform tests on the equipment involved in this case and to possibly recreate how the stunt was performed and what went wrong with it. And so a suspension was set up in the garage of Perry's home using a black span strap similar to the one used in this case, and it was hung from the ceiling. A similar black AmSpec jerk harness was used, and the actual snap shackle was used for this testing. And that was attached to a large locking carabiner, and that was attached to a load strap, and all of that gear was attached to the span strap. So I want to stress that in this case, for this recreation, the actual snap shackle was being used. The one that had been used for Owen's stunt when he fell. That actual snap shackle was used for this testing. Previously, we had seen reports where attorneys wanted to view this rigging, and the reports stated that they were not allowed to touch or move the items, only to photograph it. But now in this instance, they're using the actual snap shackle. However, they're only using a similar harness vest. They're not using the same harness vest that Owen was wearing, just a similar one. So we have the actual snap shackle, but a similar harness. And all of this was attached to the big span set, and that was hung from the ceiling of this garage. Anyway, the rigging attached to the ceiling for this recreation would have been set up similar to the layout on this diagram, which is how everything was set up in Kemper Arena for the Over the Edge event. This diagram can be found in the investigation dossier, and I covered this extensively in part 3 of this series. Link to the series playlist is down in the description box if you want to check that out. So it goes on to say that after several hours of testing, it was discovered that the cape Owen was wearing may have played a significant role in what went wrong with the stunt. The cape. And you can see in, I think it was one of the earlier parts of this series, that the riggers who were on the catwalk with Owen stated that he was fumbling with his cape. And now here, after several hours of recreating this stunt, they're figuring out that the cape may have played a pretty significant role in what went wrong. The report continues. It is believed that once Owen was placed in the equipment, then his cape was put on him over top of the equipment. The cape was then secured around his neck with a large red string that was attached to the collar of the cape. And I think it was mentioned in some of these reports that the cape was actually put around Owen after he was in the harness. If I find a screenshot of that, I'll put it here. Now, to test this, though, they weren't actually using the real cape. It says that during the testing, a towel was substituted in place of the cape, which is funny because that's what I did when I was a kid. But by doing this, this revealed that while there was no tension on the rope or harness equipment, there was no tension on the towel, which would have been like the cape. So there would have been no tension on the cape while there was no tension on the harness. But once the person began to free hang in the harness, the towel or the cape immediately tightened up around the person's neck, causing the restriction of breathing. So we have something else that's causing a restriction of breathing. So not only would the harness vest have been tight on Owen's chest, possibly restricting his breathing, which Tom DeWeer pointed out when he examined the equipment in the previous video, but on top of that, now they're finding that the cape would have been tightening around his neck as he was free hanging over the side of the catwalk waiting for his entrance cue. Just thinking about this makes me feel anxious. This says that the design of the collar of the cape may have also played a role in how the release may have been activated. The report says, during the testing, it was discovered that once the towel became tight around the back side of the harness, it also became tight in the area of the snap shackle release cord that attaches to the release pin. Oh my god, so is that saying that just the cape tightening, that the tightening of the cape could have caused the cord to release? I don't know if I'm reading into that. You can comment and let me know what you think, but is that saying that the cape tightening could have put pressure on the cord, causing the pin to release? Holy crap. It says there was also black gaff tape on the release cord near where it connected to the release pin, giving a larger surface to make contact with. If the collar area of the cape was manipulated in a manner as to release the tension around the neck, or if it was in some way moved or adjusted, that could possibly activate the release prematurely. Holy shit. Right there it is. This isn't saying that it was the cape. Well, I don't know if I should say that the cape was the main problem, but the cape was definitely a big issue here. It's right here in black and white. If the collar area of the cape was manipulated in a manner to release the tension around the neck, or in some way moved or adjusted, that could possibly activate the release prematurely. The cape, the stupid cape. And the witnesses on the catwalk said when Owen went over the edge of the catwalk, waiting for his cue, Owen was fumbling with the cape, that he threw his arms out, like in an attempt to adjust the cape. Then this says the release only needed to be moved about 1/16 of an inch to have the release open. 1/16 of an inch. This is completely insane. This report says that during the testing, this would not occur every time, but it is the most plausible scenario on how the release may have been accidentally activated. The stupid fucking cape. Not to make light of this, but what comes to mind is that movie, The Incredibles. In that movie, they say something like the cape was the undoing of many a good superhero. Remember that? That gives me goosebumps. That's creepy. But there's still a little more here. It says that also, let me get rid of this so you can see. It says also, if the body inside the harness, if the person inside the harness was moving around trying to make adjustments during the same time as the adjustments of the collar of the cape, that this too could increase the possibility of the release being activated. Well, yeah, the shock of the tension on the release, right? And we already know from earlier videos in this series that Owen was indeed shifting around in the harness and adjusting the cape. All completely natural, I would think, for someone in that position, and yet it seems as if just that natural repositioning, getting his bearings, it seems as though those movements from repositioning himself could have triggered an already poorly planned rigging to release. And remember, the cape was attached to his neck and his wrists, so moving his hands and arms around could have pulled at the cape, which could have caused the snap shackle to unexpectedly release. I mean, if the cape was tightening around his neck, and his breathing could have already been restricted from the tightening of the harness as well. So here's a scary thought. What if Owen didn't accidentally pull the release cord? What if he pulled it because he felt he needed to, because he couldn't breathe? I don't know, I guess I'm picturing like a horror movie type situation where your breathing was cut off and you knew that to breathe, all you had to do was pull on a cord, and yet you knew that by pulling that cord you would certainly fall to your death. What would you do? I think we take for granted that we can breathe so freely. I mean, it's something we all do without even thinking about it. So how precious would that breath be if it was suddenly restricted? Would you be so desperate for air that you'd knowingly trade your life for it? I mean, if it came down to choking to death or pulling a cord, maybe you would survive the fall. What would you choose? Would having that one last breath be worth taking the risk of whether or not you could survive that fall? Ugh, the thought of that is horrifying. Please don't come at me in the comments. I'm not saying that I think this was a suicide or anything like that. I think my imagination is getting the best of me here, but whether or not Owen had to make an immediate and deliberate choice to release that snap shackle because he couldn't breathe, from, like a panicked state of mind, not a suicidal state of mind. I suppose it can't necessarily be ruled out as a possibility if you think about it, because no one will ever know what was actually going through Owen's head in those last few minutes. Oh my gosh, I have to take a break. I'm feeling claustrophobic or something. This is so messed up. This is the end of the first page, so let's just keep going. Continuing on to page 2 of this report, it says that at the conclusion of the testing, it was determined that there were many different variables in how this incident occurred. Okay, so now this part of the report is going to state their conclusions after repeated recreations of this stunt. And it says, the snap shackle was able to be accidentally tripped a couple of times during the testing by body and arm movements in the harness, trying to adjust the towel, which was a substitution for the cape, and to adjust the harness, and to relieve the tension around the neck. DeWeer did state that when he would do some type of similar stunt that he would never bind up the device or cover it up, and possibly allow something to interfere with its operation. So the cape covering the equipment was a bad idea. DeWeer stated that the snap shackle and jerk vest were poor choices to be used in this stunt, knowing now what the end result was. However, this does not necessarily make the use of these items wrong. Well, and again, we talked about that in previous videos. There were no rules and regulations that these stunt riggers needed to follow. They were allowed to use the equipment that they felt would get the job done and that they were comfortable working with. This report ends by saying that the reporting detective, who was, again, Detective Martin with the homicide unit, he took several 35mm photographs of the harness that DeWeer would have used for this stunt, and of the 3-ring release device. If you remember, in the previous video to this one, DeWeer said that if he was in charge of this stunt, he would have used a 3-ring release device that was similar to the release on a parachute. And this says that this film will be forwarded to the Regional Crime Lab upon Detective Martin's return to Kansas City, Missouri. So photos were taken of the rigging that DeWeer would have used, and perhaps the crime lab will then use those photos to compare to the rigging that was used. And that is the end of that report. But to recap, at the conclusion of the testing, it was determined that there were many different variables in how this incident occurred. And those variables were that the snap shackle was able to be accidentally tripped very easily by body and arm movements in the harness, trying to adjust the cape and the harness and relieve tension around the neck. Also the cape, the use of the cape covering up the device, allowing it to interfere with the operation of the rigging. And also the snap shackle and jerk vest were poor choices in hindsight, but it was not necessarily wrong to use these items. And it looks like that's the conclusion that the police have reached as far as what went wrong in this case. So there you have it. The cape may have been a bigger problem than even the snap shackle, because the expert says the snap shackle was not necessarily a poor choice. So maybe the rigging would have worked fine had the cape not been a factor. Unfortunately, we'll never know. And that's all I have for now. Part 11 is coming soon, and that video will feature more police interviews. And was there a video of Owen's fall that popped up for sale on eBay? Find out in part 11. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. This has been AmKay at Purple Sky 11. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!